the greater Cranberry.
You're right.
So for anyone who had been under a rock for the last almost 10 years now, Becca is the lead rec tech for Acadia, but this is her thesis work where she had, did a deep dive into the recreation system and rolling it up. But Becca, it's been about 10 years, right? You've been here. You started out as a
2016, after I came back from college, or after I ended college, and I started working with Charlie.
Yeah.
And then 2020 became full-time with FOA. So it's been a little bit. Yeah. So seeing the number of people in this room, I'm happy to give it as a presentation, but I'm also happy to have questions being circulated. If there's something on the screen you're just curious about, let me know. This is kind of an abridged version of my thesis defense. So some of the stuff may be slightly disjointed, but for the most part, the information's there, and I think you're gonna have a good time like I am. So to, I guess, formalize this is an assessment of visitor use experiences during the first year Cadillac Mountain Summit Road Vehicle Reservation System, essentially understanding visitor use in that first year that the reservation system was implemented. It's just not going to advance. That's good. All right. I also have to acknowledge that there was a team behind this, including my advisor, Adam, social scientist, and a few other folks that you may know that are from the park. This was formalized through the IRB process at the University of Maine. I was approved with the National Permit. Thank you, Abe. And then also took the human subject certification that you need to work with folks. What we're going to be talking about today, the lunch and learn, is the background, methodology, results, and conclusions. I say save questions at the end, but I just told you that you don't have to. Just as a warning, this is a free-flowing discussion. Looks like there's one chat, but I don't know if you just said, hey, if you need anything, put in the chat.
That was what I said.
Okay, awesome. So Acadia National Park, if you're not familiar, there are generally three components. Let's see, Schoodic Peninsula is over on the right side, Mount Desert Island, where you are now, and Isla Ho, which is just 40 minutes south of Stonington. Today, we're going to be focusing primarily on Mount Desert Island, which is this area here, and particularly on Mount Desert Island. If you haven't been, there is one mountain in Acadia National Park that you can drive up, and it's Cadillac Mountain. So that's outlined in the red triangle there, and 3.5 mile summit road. It's paved. It's a very popular destination in the park. So according to Bullock 2007, 76% of visitors who come to Acadia come to Cadillac Mountain. You can access by personal vehicle. You can hike up a trail. You can bike on the road, take a concession bus like Ollie's Trolley that has an interpretive component to it. You can take a taxi or ride sharing service. And there are other reasons people come to Acadia: for the historic, environmental, outdoor recreation, and sociocultural aspect of the park. In regard to Acadia National Park's visitation as a whole, this is from essentially 2021, because this is from 2021, which was the first year that the Cadillac Mountain vehicle permit was started. And so you can see within a more or less 5-year average that in 2021, we had a huge kind of bumper crop. And you can see that there's growth in popularity to Acadia National Park. And through that, we also see that Cadillac had a similar bumper crop in that 2021. And what this is date on the x-axis and number of vehicles on the y-axis. And what you can see is the parking capacity is the black dotted line. So the 157 designated parking spots at the summit is that line, and it changes because of the time that the sun rises and sets, kind of thing. And then for the red line is the average number of vehicles per day. So you can see that there's kind of that threshold. That black line is the threshold, and we're almost always above the threshold without the reservation system. So this is kind of a picture if you haven't seen it before. In 2021, the day after the reservation system stopped, I can't remember the exact date, but October 2021, visitor protection officer Tim Rand went up there with his camera and was able to take a video of the entire summit road. As I mentioned, there are only 157 spots at the summit, and I looked at the traffic counts, there were over 600 vehicles that morning, the day after the reservation system. So what we see here, if you don't think there's anything wrong with this photo, let me point out a few things here to you. That on the left-hand side, we have some vegetation damage. And actually in that area is where some of the so the restoration plots are, right? We have Tim Rand in the car trying to avoid these visitors on the right-hand side, and he has to actually go in the inbound lane, or sorry, in the outbound lane as he's going inbound. And in addition, we have undesignated parking spots on the side, which are also vegetation damage. So you can see that there is definitely a need for the reservation system, especially the day after. You can see people are trying to avoid the system. So in regard to managed access systems, just generally, before COVID or pre-2020, we saw that there were two systems that we were kind of looking at. I think there might have been Zion at the time, and I can't remember exactly, but Haleakala for sure and Muir Woods were the two that the Park Service had managed access systems. And then COVID happened, and that really changed the way people recreated in parks, right? So a lot more people were feeling safe outside, and they were going to protected areas in the neck of the woods, or maybe to national parks nearby. And what we found post 2020 was that there were a lot more systems that needed these managed access systems, because there were so many people that were coming to different national parks at that time. Acadia specifically is highlighted because there was the transportation management plan that mentioned that there was going to be a reservation system regardless of COVID. And a lot of these, like Arches, was supposed to have a reservation system in 2015 to 2017, somewhere in there. And the public were like, they shut it down completely. And then when COVID came along, it became so normalized that Arches was like, okay, I think this is the time we can do it. So even prior to COVID, there were parks that were trying to make this happen. And then COVID kind of let the floodgates open, which I think was for the better. So understanding managed access systems, and I say managed access system and reservation system kind of in the same hand, but the historic theme of what it used to be called, which is a rationed use system, is kind of the historic way of thinking of ration use was that it was in a wilderness setting. So wilderness with a big W. And what happened was that not as many people go to the wilderness with a big W, it's just less used generally. And so managers of these wilderness areas thought this would be good as a last resort. Do not try to diminish the flow of people to these wilderness areas. We want as many people to come as possible. And because there was not as many people anyways, it kind of made sense. But your current managed access systems are high density, very popular. And so you can't take this wilderness idea into a front country popular place and get the same result. So what our research is understanding is that we want a lot of people to get outdoors, right? We want that same understanding that we don't want to ration anyone's use. But with the current understanding, you need these access systems in order for people to have a better and high quality visitor experience to these very popular areas. And this was highlighted in the 1992 General Management Plan. The 2015 Transportation Management Plan was that we needed to do something about this traffic congestion in some capacity. So you can even see from the archives, the large crowds are nothing new. It was Easter service of 1930s, 1940s. And I would say current day, but it's already 23 years old, is the aerial photo of Cadillac Mountain East lot, where in the red is the areas where there's overflow. Right, so it exceeds the parking capacity even at that time. And then in 2015, Transportation Management Plan was started by the managers here. In 2019, the record of decision was signed to say, yep, you have the go ahead. In October 2020, the reservation system had a dry run for 18 days. And then in 2021, in May, is when the vehicle reservation system started, and that's when this study started. So right off the gate, I was like, hey, we need these opinions of these folks, which is great. And understanding that, the park understands that the purpose and need for this action is that their intensive use, right? So these very popular areas need the intensive management. And this was even said by Manning in 1985. So this is nothing new as well. If you are not familiar with the reservation system, particularly this happens between mid-May to mid-October, the dates vary. Sunrise and daytime block, so those are two separate blocks, and sunset is in the daytime block, so there's no separate sunset block. 30% of the permits are available 90 days in advance, and 70% are available at 10 a.m. 2 days before the reservation date. This just allows the managers to change allotment if needed, which I think recently hasn't really been the case. It's been pretty consistent. So in regard to the study objectives, what we were looking at were two different things. First was assessing the visitor use experience outcomes of the reservation system. So things like social and transportation related factors. And then also looking at a little bit of theory, which we're not going to, I think, dive into too much today, is the experience use history and the assessment of the visitor experience. So what I mean by that is if you're a first-time visitor and a repeat visitor, are you having a similar experience? Do you find similar attributes important, right? So in regard to the transportation or social factor, like I said, we're not going to go too much into that today, but it is interesting to dive into 150-page thesis if you wanted to. In understanding how we even got to this point, why we wanted to understand transportation and social related factors, there were a couple of studies that looking at Littlejohn 1999 and Halo and Manning 2009. They were asking folks about what they least liked about their visit to Acadia in 1999, and they found that crowding, traffic, congested parking, okay, ding, 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 that's like a red flag, right? And then visitors rank what they ranked most important was the scenery, right? The access to these important sites, say like Cadillac Mountain, and similarly the traffic volume. So these are some of the things that were swirling around that the reservation system was trying to address. So in our study, we tried to understand where these criteria met, right? Also, I needed to mention that while I am discussing what they least liked about their visit in this study, they do talk about that they were highly satisfied with their visit. This just happens to be the things that they least liked about their visit. So how was the study conducted? So the collection period happened in late June until August. Late June was the pre-testing period. The survey wasn't changed, so I continued until the end of August. It was in-person on-site interception. So as people were going along the Summit Loop Road, capturing them as they were leaving to go to the parking lot generally. There was also a component of online. So if someone said, oh, I can't take it at this time, I can't just go to the bathroom or something done like that, I was able to hand them a QR code that they could give me their email and they could take it at another time. There was 1,501 respondents across the 3 months, and 1,250 were personal vehicles. And this was intentional. I was trying to get a majority of folks that were personal vehicle users because that's what the reservation system the permitting system was trying to capture, are those opinions. Although I was not trying to only have personal vehicle users. I also understood that there were hikers, bikers, concession bus users, and other modes that I captured the opinion on, which we're not going to go into today. But hikers definitely have a different view of Cadillac Mountain than the personal vehicle holders, which is another talk for another day, I think. So from here on out, I'm only talking about personal vehicle users unless I specify otherwise. So the average respondent, the demographics were on average white, female, around middle-aged, very well educated, have some disposable income. Travel characteristics of this person or group could have been that most likely first-time visitor coming between 1 and 5 days. Like I said, this was post-COVID, so this could be definitely different now, but this was at the time the average respondent, maybe traveling with family and, with their partner or with their, family unit. They took their preferred mode of transportation. So asking them, hey, you took a personal vehicle, was that what you intended to use? Some people said, no, I had to take a personal vehicle because I couldn't hike because there wasn't enough parking at the base. So that's what that extra 3% kind of is for. Average length of stay was about 2 hours. The thing about that is that's from tip to tail, right? So from when they kind of came up to when they left. And let's see. So as mentioned before, it was probably their first time coming to Cadillac Mountain. So 53% of respondents say this was their first time. This is actually slightly higher than average. Usually Acadia gets more returning visitors, but because of the way that COVID worked, I think a lot of people had reservations for 2020. I don't mean reservations. I mean hotel accommodations for 2020 that were pushed to 2021. And that was kind of increasing the number of first-time users to Acadia National Park. Let's see, 66% said that this was the first time in a managed access system. This is the first time they had ever seen a reservation system in a national park, ever. And I did clarify in the survey instrument that this did not include the campgrounds, right? Or any state park or anything like that. So this is specific to the US national parks. Although it does make sense because you think about the slide that I was showing you before, pre-2020, there were only more or less 2 plus or minus 1 managed access systems. So this is new for a lot of people, which means that there was limited research in this, and that's kind of why I jumped on this opportunity as well. Okay, so now we know that they're first-time users, right? So then how does a first-time user learn about the reservation system? Well, what we found was that on average, people were learning through the Acadia National Park website, which is great. That's how we want people to learn. Word of mouth as being second. Mixed modes is kind of a combination of those two and maybe a few others. We also see the visitor center, social media as being an influence, the lodging establishments, and then other as being, 1% was recreation.gov, people going right to recreation.gov website. Other folks may be saying that right at the booth or somewhere else in Acadia, a ranger told them, calling Acadia National Park. I'm surprised even people had mentioned that. I didn't even know people called the park for anything at all in that regard.
They never can get a person, but they.
Yes, exactly. I've been in a hole for 4 years. So what's interesting about that is, there's 2 other folks, Irie Wheeler, who's a PhD candidate, and Noah Creaney, who is also a PhD candidate, and they're in places out west. And they actually, surprisingly, we're all doing the same survey at the same time, but we didn't know any of us were doing it until just recently we came across that we were doing virtually the same thing, which was amazing. So I got talking to Noah and Irie, and they sent me their presentations. And what's interesting is that I was just showing you about the word of mouth and how people were learning in Acadia. Well, in Arches, people were also similarly learning about their reservation system or the park service reservation system for Arches through the website and through word of mouth, very similar to Acadia. So a lot of these people who are coming to parks have a similar kind of vein of thought, which is great because if you're trying to target a certain person, you might be able to target more than just people who come to Acadia, but just general national park as well. Oh, actually, it's interesting. They had 0% for park staff, so we kind of got them beat, which is great.
Sorry, I was just pulling up what my first time, mine was at 62% was their first time visiting.
Wow, yeah, that's crazy. So it's one of those things that there are people to national parks that are new, and we love having them. We want them to experience the park. And I think maybe Abe was mentioning even before this call is that who are the people that are excluded? And that's something that is also another study that can be conducted, but that's also something of like who isn't coming to Cadillac and why. So this is a graph. So on the x-axis is time and y is percent. If you look at the rectangle, we're showing that people are planning for their trips about 1 to 2 months out on average. And as you get closer to the time that they're coming to Acadia, that's when they're purchasing. If you remember the slide about the 70% and 30%, the 2 bars, the white bars that say purchase kind of on the 0 to 48, that makes sense that about 60% of folks are talking about purchasing within 48 hours of their visit because that's when most of them are released to the park. So that shouldn't alarm anyone, but we understand also that in the learning process, about 25% of people are learning within 48 hours. So they might be coming up to the booth, they might have to be turned around and having to purchase their permit. On the side there, it says no shows. So the people that purchase a permit and don't end up showing up for their time slot is what a no-show is. We're most commonly seen close to the 3-month mark, which makes sense. I mean, if you're purchasing so far out, you really can't take into account weather, trip planning things. So people are willing to have insurance that they have a park permit for Cadillac Mountain. And then the $6, whether or not they get a refund or not, it's nothing to them. The assurance of having it is part of their visit is what they're looking forward to, which comes to the point of, okay, so first time visitor, you learn about your pass, you're getting your pass. Well, what if you have a problem getting your pass? What we found was that a majority of folks didn't actually have too much of a problem getting their pass, so 58%. What we did want to find or look into was that people who reported having issues getting their reservation permit, 42% of the respondents stated that a majority of the reason why they didn't get their permit was either their first choice or slot was unavailable or limited cellular data. Geez, how it works. So with limited cellular data, we know that the park is notorious for not having great cellular connectivity based on the mountains that are kind of shadowing. And a lot of people might not know that this is the reality in the park. I think there's like one line on the park website that says like, yeah, cell service isn't great. And so there is a part on recreation.gov where you can user generated, like I have AT&T and this is how many bars I have. but it doesn't say where they have the bars. So Cadillac Mountain does have some cellular connectivity, but it is kind of bunched up and is a hot spot in that area where everyone's trying to get a permit. So it's not necessarily representative of the entire park or that area. Particularly if we look a little bit deeper into the issues that folks had by demographic, the folks under 44, don't ask me why 44, but the groups that were slightly younger, the problem they had was that they actually missed their time slot. So it was a time management thing. It's not that they couldn't get it. It's just that they weren't on time or they spent too long enjoying the park and came around and it was 3 o'clock in their 8 a.m. reservation. The folks that were 45 to 59, they had problem actually like accessing recreation.gov. And then also the folks who were 60 plus had difficulty just like getting information generally about it and the just kind of general confusion. So this is good to know. Yeah, and I'm not trying, it just, you could put it in boxes, but I'm just going to leave it here. It's something that if we're trying to communicate to a certain audience, if we're seeing the no-show rates as being maybe slightly younger, we might have to communicate to that group to say, hey, your group is most likely to miss their time slot. Make sure that you're there within 30 minutes or, something like that. Whether or not the park's actually going to do that is to be continued.
30, 40, 40.
Yeah.
Even with kids.
I was going to say, oh, I'm in that camp where it's not them per se, it's the situation at hand. So I understand. As part of the survey, I wanted to look at an importance performance analysis, an IPA. I didn't end up doing or having the IPA here, and I'll tell you in a minute. But essentially what an IPA is that you ask how important something is and then how satisfied something is with the same exact question. How important is a clean bathroom to you and how satisfied were you with this clean bathroom, right? But we asked that with many aspects relating to their trip. And so these matrices gave us the importance and satisfaction levels of visitors or respondents. And the reason why I didn't do an IPA specifically is an IPA is used if you have areas that you need to grow in or you're really lacking in. It was consistently very difficult to look at these data and say something that was 4.7 out of 5 that the park needed to improve on. Like it was very difficult to say, yes, people had a very high quality visitor experience, but the park, you really need to focus on this, which is not true. And so I kind of had to pivot in a little ways to say that the park is doing a really great job and making sure visitors have a high quality experience on Cadillac Mountain. Once they're in the system, they really love it. And one of the things that was brought up to kind of the forefront here, there's a lot of text, but the thing you kind of need to focus on here is that people loved the fact that they could explore at their own pace, right? So this was super important to them. So the ability to explore at their own pace was kind of rated top importance. The unobstructed view of the scenery, so things on Cadillac that they could see, and I think I mentioned this before, is that if that salmon farm came into existence, this would probably be brought up in some capacity because that would have been a huge eyesore in a lot of ways, environmentally and just visually. But also transportation related issues like finding a parking spot. People found that very important. So if you went back to the time that I was telling you that 1999 study, one of the things that people were talking about that was the thing they liked least about their visit to Acadia specifically was their ability to find parking and congestion. Well, if people are finding this extremely important and you look at the satisfaction rating, it looks like, from what it's worth, that the reservation system is actually taking care of some of these problems that people had in the past, right? So it's taking that parking satisfaction pretty high, not guaranteed a parking spot. So when you get a permit, there is no guarantee you're going to find a parking spot. They don't say anywhere that there's a spot for you there. But we hope that people do find a parking spot and they don't have to circle that many times. Another thing that I need to bring up is that understanding that finding a parking spot and maybe a lower satisfaction rating is that most of these people were in the east lot. I didn't just disseminate between the east lot and the west lot. And if people said that they had a hard time finding a parking spot in the east lot, there may have been parking in the west lot, and they might have said that their satisfaction was lower because they were circling in a specific parking lot that they could have had parking somewhere else. So that's just kind of one of the caveats. But overall, I mean, to have what is above 90% in a lot of these, and I mean, even if you go to later on in the importance and satisfaction levels, even folks who rated something as less important to them, I mean, that's still 3.7. They rated that satisfaction still pretty high. So just because it wasn't important to them doesn't mean that they weren't satisfied with the number of visitors that were at the summit or the wayfinding ability or the traffic flow on the road, right? So let's see here. Oh, yeah. So this is back to that study that I was telling you about that visitors had rated in the past that they had a high quality visitor experience. And now we understand that the transportation concerns rated higher than a lot of those social factors as well, if you don't account for the two at the top, the unobstructed view of the scenery and the, what was the other one? Whatever. Yeah, at your own pace. Thank you. So we understand that these systems are very important to these visitors and that the reservation system helps with a lot of these things that they find important. Talking briefly about what I was saying before, visitor experience or the visitor use history. So we thought potentially, okay, so say you had been to Cadillac prior to the reservation system, you would rate your satisfaction level higher now knowing there's a reservation system because you're like, oh, it was like the worst before. So that's what we maybe had thought. Well, just because you experience traffic on Cadillac doesn't mean you haven't experienced somewhere at your house, right? So this experience use history, I was totally wrong in thinking a repeat visitor would think they had a better time now. Well, people who are first time rate the importance of finding a parking spot just as important as people who had been here before. I mean, that's like blanket across the board, but now I realize that. And of course, science is an iterative process. And so now looking at the comparison between first time and repeat visitors and a lot of those attributes that you saw, there's virtually no difference. We see that the repeat users and the first time users have very similar importance and satisfaction ratings across the board, meaning that they're so similar, in fact, that there's nothing that is needing to be alerted to the park to say these repeat users are having a lower satisfaction rating because, which is really great. That means everyone's having virtually the same experience, which if you go to returning visitors, we did ask, did your experience improve, right? So you had come here before, how was it now? And essentially 83% from the remain the same. And yes, they had said, oh yeah, like it was either the same at last time or it actually improved, which was really great because the park was worried that there wouldn't be this improvement in the experience, but there really is. I mean, we also got comments related to why their experience improved. It was parking, congestion, all of those transportation related issues that the park was trying to address. And they said it improved because of those things, which is so amazing. The folks that mentioned no, their experience did not improve. A lot of that was actually weather-based. So a lot of people said, hey, I tried to come and it was foggy the 2 days I was trying to come. So of course, their experience did not improve. And then there were some people who were whining about they just didn't like the system just generally, but that, you know, is always going to come up. And 4% they didn't remember. Yeah. So interestingly enough, similar to what I was saying before with Noah Creaney and Irie Wheeler, Noah asked a similar question, and in Rocky, 76 to 77% mentioned that their visit was about the same or better. So this is in line with other parks. This Rocky is a system-wide management, so the whole park versus a site-wide, which is just Cadillac. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but it is something to just give you an understanding that other parks out there are asking similar things. Arches, same thing, asking about if it detracted from their experience, and between 76 to 95% said, no, this is great. We really enjoy it. So across the board, it seems to be pretty well received. So let's see what happened when visitors were displaced from a high use time to a less popular time. So RSG, which is a consulting firm, came in 2016, and they had this report on Cadillac Mountain prior to the reservation system, understanding where the peaks and valleys are. So where demand and supply meet. And what we find is that the park was trying to redistribute the use. They're trying to flatten the curve. They're trying to take these spikes and flatten out the distribution so that all day there's a consistency compared to having spikes throughout the day. So if you take into the study, looking at the comparison between those folks who said that they wanted to get a reservation, say at sunrise, and said, oh, I couldn't get what I wanted, but I went at another time, what we found was that there was very high satisfaction levels of folks who were saying, oh, I didn't get sunrise, but I got another time and it was amazing. And those mid-morning and early evening had particularly high satisfaction rating in regard to different variables, which was exactly what the park wants, is that redistribution of use and people still having a good time.
So we had daily capacity, it was just, we had to spread that use out.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Flattening the boat.
Yeah. So let's see, finding a parking spot specifically, this is kind of the contention point where, of course, the sunrise block is going to be better. And the reason why finding a parking spot at sunrise is better is because at 10 p.m. the night before, law enforcement officer, visitor protection officers close the gate around 10 p.m. and it doesn't open again until about 3:30 or 4 in the morning, depending on when the sun rises. So there's a blank slate. There's no one has to be driven out, which is really nice for folks coming in because there's a number of permits that they sell and then the number of spots that are there. During the daytime, that's a little bit tough because you think of the turnover, right? If it's a day like this, people might be in and out really quick. There might be 10 minutes. But on a very sunny day, or if you have 2 or 3 rainy days and then a sunny day, oh, forget it. You know, people stay so long. So it's very difficult to have that average, but we try. And sometimes, as we see in the middle of the day, people are than the average length of stay, which is 2 hours. Although we did find that people who still had trouble finding a parking spot, like at those times, they still reported high levels of satisfaction. So while it's still an issue in some capacity, people said they still had a good time. They'd have to circle maybe the lot a few more times, but generally they were saying, this is really great and I like this. So much so that the visitor survey result comment, one of the person kind of highlighted it very in a nice deep package that they said compared, Cadillac Mountain to other areas was night and day, right? So that they went to Jordan Pond prior to, and they couldn't visit because there was no parking, and the Park Loop Road, they were only able to park because the right lane had been converted into what is a standing parking lot, and Cadillac Mountain had adequate parking. So there's also this, like, I should have asked in my survey, did you visit other areas of Acadia before you came to Cadillac? Because you could be tainted if you went to Cadillac first, you're like, oh my word, this is amazing. And then you go to other places of the park, you might have rated it high satisfaction. And then you went to other places of the park, you're like, this is ridiculous. Some people might have done the opposite, like this person saying they had gone to Jordan Pond and maybe the Ocean Drive corridor. So it's really interesting to hear that dichotomy from the respondents as well. I think I touched on this a little bit, but essentially, if I were to do this study next time, I only looked for people who had purchased a permit. There were a lot of people who didn't purchase a permit and they were left out of the system, whether it was economically not viable, if it didn't work with their time, it was sold out, whatever. That could be something explored in the future where you do capture that audience of folks who didn't make it to the top in any way. Collect more data on non-personal vehicle users. Of course, like I said, a majority of it was personal vehicle users, but what about the hikers? We saw an increase of hikers on the Northridge Trail by quite a bit, and it would be interesting to see what their thoughts were more in depth than the 140 that were captured. Something also to mention was that bicyclists had written in the oral comments stating that they did feel safer. And I think the reason why is if you go to the booth at the bottom, there's this maybe 10-second minimum lag between vehicles going, up to the summit. And so when you consider that spacing between for the bicyclists, the cars aren't all bunched up behind them while they're trying to go around a curve. And so I think bicyclists we're talking about particularly, I mean, I heard this all the time that they just felt so much safer. They obviously want a whole bike day on Cadillac. They want, the whole kit and caboodle, but for what it's worth, they said this is so much of a better improvement. If you think about the reservation system, because it flattened out that curve, they actually don't have a point during the day where there's almost no vehicles. Prior to the reservation system, that mass exodus after sunrise, they had the mountain to themselves for maybe about an hour and a half. And now it's not necessarily like that anymore. So it's actually good to hear that they're saying they feel safer, even though they don't have that window of time in the morning like they used to. Parking, and like I was mentioning, a function of capacity or unaware of the available space in the other parking lots. That's something that also could be explored because the west lot is most likely underutilized 90% of the time, I would say, unless it's sunset. Conclusion, oh, I don't know why it's underlined. Most visitors had a positive, high quality visitor experience. I mean, that's kind of the blanket statement for most visitors, right? Of course, you're going to get the ancillary folks who maybe had a hard time getting a reservation, but once they were in the system, we found that they just had such a great time. The reservation system addressed a lot of these transportation related issues that the park is, was trying to say, hey, we'll make this better. And then also, I think in some capacity, you can make an argument that other high use areas may benefit from a reservation system. Acadia specifically is segmented in a way where it would be site and not system. I mean, it would be a while before that, but that's something to think about. And that also managed access systems did not significantly decrease visitor experience, just the opposite. So it could have been that, oh, this reservation system is going to make my visit the worst. Well, actually, most people were saying this was a positive experience. So in that, just kind of concluding here that visitors really realized that before the reservation system, they had the freedom to go whenever they wanted to the Cadillac Summit to experience, on their trip. And what we find is that the reservation system gives them the certainty of access. So previously you could have the freedom of access to go, but you might have had to wait in line for 45 minutes. Well, now that you have the certainty of access, you don't have to wait 45 minutes in line, and you have most likely the opportunity to have a parking spot, which is really great. And then
I think it's also. They have an entry time, but not.
yes, that they don't have, and that's where the explore at your own pace, but there's no like meter person up there, like giving them a ticket if they're here too long. I think they like the ability to be like, I can be up here for 4 hours if I want to sunbathe and read a book. Like they feel like once they're in the system, they kind of have this freedom, which is nice. So I think people really find that important. And I kind of like to share this story is that there was a little girl kind of like clinking down the trail on the Cadillac Summit. And I was like drawn to it because it was like shiny and bright. I was like, oh my gosh. And so she came over and I asked to take a picture of all of her, badges. And I asked her which one was her favorite. And she pulled out this one, which is the one she made with her grandfather. It was a Rotten Stump National Park and Preserve. And I asked her the history of the national park, and she said that her grandfather had a tree in his front yard and they cut it down and it was a rotten stump. And so she said that was one of her favorite parks. And I just thought that was so sweet because we're trying to protect and preserve this park for future generations, and it kind of just embodies that in this little girl that I just thought was so cute. Couldn't resist. And finally, I'd like to thank, of course, the Park Service and Friends of Acadia and the University of Maine with the help of this project, and of course, the social science team. And now that I've taken up my allotted 37 and a half minutes, I am now open for questions from any of you.
For the west lot, it's also a fair walk from.
Yes. Yes.
So I think that might also lend itself to a lack of view, because there's no trail from the west lot. No separation.
Yes. So that's technically out of the scope of my research, but if you want to talk about an accessibility trail or yeah.
There's plans for it.
Plans for-
Plan for
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, yeah,
Right.
that's true.
But it's not a long.
Yeah, I mean, it's long, but.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry I was late, so you may have addressed this at the beginning, but do you know during the period of time that you were asking people, how many people were turned away?
Yes. So that was not under the scope of this research. However, as my other hat job, the number of turnaways. So the number of turnaways means someone comes to the booth at Cadillac Mountain and they're denied access for whatever reason, whether they're too early for their slot, they don't have a permit, you name it. So what we call are those are turnarounds. And on average, the first year of a reservation system is going to have about 30% turn away. And I think a lot of that is messaging. A lot of that is trying to get people to understand that there is a reservation system in the area. Subsequent year is more or less 20%, and then it goes down to just about 10 to 15% in the third year, which is what we're in. I think we calculated 18% this past year, so we're kind of in that 20% range. But there's always going to be a certain percentage of folks who, like, I don't know, 5 to 10% that will always be turned away. because of whatever reason. So there is a constant number, but that's generally how it goes, is 30, 20, 10. Yeah, that's a great question, but I did not do that in my scope of my research. But that's just institutional knowledge. So
What was the most people were willing to pay for a reservation?
yeah, so that's a great question, and yeah, I might have to, so I will tell you the most someone wrote was $110. Yeah, I mean, that is the most though, in theory. I'm answering your question. I do have slides for the fee folks in the back that we can talk about after, and I can kind of give you some of the layout there. But yeah, generally people, it was $6. That's where I forgot to mention. In 2021, it was $6, so $2 to recreation.gov, the software platform, and then $4 went right back to Cadillac Mountain operations. And people, I would say on average, were willing to pay upwards of 2 to 3 times what they paid. And it's kind of, I don't want to like generalize, but if you bought a permit 3 months out at $6 and then you bought another one at 48 hours, right? So you bought 2 for the chance to go in once, you're technically willing to pay $12 for one opportunity. So your willingness to pay increases, so it's double, right? But this is where I'm not an economist and I can't speak in behalf of that, but I did get some help from Adam Dagno at the University of Maine to explore what that looks like, or the average respondent. What I can say, and I'm going to put this up here, is that the average respondent for Cadillac Mountain, you can see kind of all the way, on the right side of this graph here, on the x-axis is the average annual income, or median annual income. I think it's median annual income, and the respondent number. So you can see that a lot of folks have some disposable income starting from the $100,000 range and on, which is representative of a lot of parks, I feel, have high income folks that come. For what it's worth, we kind of know, but the respondents that I had that summer, most were from the New England plus New York, because New York's not in New England, I don't think, right? And so Massachusetts had the highest percentage, which we understand. We were within like 18 hours of many metropolitan areas, right? So Washington, DC, Philly, Boston, New York, New Jersey, Portland, Maine, which I don't know if I would call a metropolitan area. But we see that a lot of these folks were from out of state, and only 4% were from Maine. In 2020, I think we had more local visitation because people didn't have that tourism in their town, wherever they were from, and they were coming to the park. And we saw a lot of weekend visitation, which is more indicative of local. But we're seeing here that there is the discrepancy. Generally, the median annual income of a Mainer is, I think from 2021 was $57,000. So you can kind of see they fall on the third or fourth bar.
I did similar questions last summer. Similarly, the annual household income, I had 56.6% making over 100,000.
Yep.
And it had 6.3% were full-time residents of the state.
Yep. So that's for Acadia, like, this was not just Cadillac Mountain. So, yeah, this were just Cadillac Mountain respondents, so the people who got into the reservation system. If you look at the lower, so the less than 10,000, 10 to 25,000, that's a very low percent, but it could be that as Acadia National Park representative, just generally, there could be a higher percentage of those folks, but they just didn't make it into the system. And that's another discussion about who is excluded from potentially the system. So.
Well, just the park fee excludes a lot of people from getting here at all.
Yeah.
And so, right, so the survey is of course only capturing people with the $6 didn't exclude it, plus the entrance fee.
Right, and
so
at this time in 2021, the booth at the bottom was not checking for compliance in regard to, or sorry, they were checking for compliance of a park pass, but they weren't selling them. They were directing them to the gift shop, or the Park Service has the statement where they're not going to charge you the amount. Like if you're paying the $50 for or $55 for the annual fee, but you're a veteran, they're not going to charge you the $55, they're going to charge you less. So sometimes they would have to send them to the visitor center instead of the summit because they want to give them the best price. So that could also be factored in, is that, people at the time may not have had to have a park pass or could have said that they had it, but didn't. So I'm not saying that that's any factor, but now for sure it's cracking down a little bit more, which I think is necessary because they're in the park technically. So any other questions with the 10 minutes?
Where would you like to see it?
That's a good question. So like to see a pilot before an actual reservation, because I think we found out, and many of you know, with the Ocean Drive corridor was one of the areas that the Park Service had wanted to implement that system. And we found out that that was not going to be conducive to timing staff, many opportunities that it just wasn't going to happen. So I would say if I had to choose, I think Bass Harbor Head Lighthouse would be an interesting set. However, with the putting my other hat on, with the traffic counts that we have at Bass Harbor Head Lighthouse, it pretty much doesn't get busy until about 11 a.m. Like, I mean, yes, it can get busy, but like backed up busy until around 11 a.m. And so I think there's a certain level of, it would be later. So the midday, on average 10 to 2 is the busiest time in the park, just generally. But I think at Bass Harbor Head Lighthouse, the sunset is probably the time. However, you can also make the argument that the person's at one time. So the number of people that are there, is that bothering anyone? Like, can we have more people there and it's fine? If that's the case, then you might be able to have a shuttle system that allows infinite number of people up to what they can allow, what they feel is acceptable. And that's also going to change. If you're from Massachusetts, the number of people you see maybe downtown on a daily basis is going to be different than someone who's maybe on Cranberry Isle who sees 2 people a year. And so with that, you also understand, Bass Harbor Head Lighthouse, I think, is also an easy target because recently it's like put on the quarter. It just seems to be on every calendar nowadays or the background of every screen on Microsoft. And so I think just the popularity is there, and I could see that being a pilot. Jordan Pond House will be interesting because of the concessionaire, and I don't want to go into that, but I think that would be something you would have to look at the whole corridor rather than just the actual north lot. So that's something that Adam probably would be the person to go to for that. But yeah, I think those 2 areas, and it's tough because at what point do you make so many sites that you then create a system? Dave Smith always told me that he wishes that at the point at which you turn on the one-way, if there was a fee booth there, you'd probably capture a majority of the use. And I thought about that and I'm like, yeah, you could, but at the point at which you have a whole system, you have to account for the smallest parking lot, right? So at Rocky Mountain, Bear Lake is the place that everyone goes. And so pretty much they're accounting for the whole system of just Bear Lake. It's a, one specific site. If you let 400 to 500 people into the Park Loop Road, just generally, then you have to account for, say, Cadillac Mountain, and we might have the same system or might have the same issues that we had prior to, because everyone wants to go to Cadillac Mountain at the same time, even though we're accounting for the whole system, right? So this goes into more of the in-depth part of managed access systems, but I think, yeah, Bass Harbor Head Lighthouse is an easy one-way in, one-way out. And if you were to compare other national parks with this, I would say Haleakala would probably be the easiest comparison. So if someone can send me to Hawaii and I do the study there, because, yeah, for reasons.
And I can be your
Yes, exactly.
I'll help you out.
Exactly, thank you.
I do have another question. You said that the 3 months, people who ordered their reservation 3 months out were more likely to miss their reservation.
Yeah.
And I agree with your kind of analysis of it, but I'm just curious, does anybody know, does Rep.gov send out reminders?
That's a good question that I don't, it's out of the scope of my research, but I don't know if that's a good question.
It's like
Wow.
subscription services, remember, shop or skip, and this is your last day.
Well, there's a certain level of like reminding and nagging, right? So if you send one, it's like a dentist appointment, they tell you once, but if you do multiple times and it's nagging, and I don't know if there's, I'm sorry, if you. Yeah. Yeah. Right. And I think the next opportunity would be having a survey that you could blast to all the folks that went to Cadillac Mountain or even didn't go to Cadillac Mountain and But that's internal. I think Rocky maybe does that. There's one other park, I don't know, maybe you all know, that does the after action kind of survey. And that would be, it's beyond the like stars. I think stars gives you a general understanding, but like having a real survey, a 5-question survey could really give park the insight every year, every opportunity for them to continue and have that iterative process with the reservation system.
Because they collect email addresses when you make a reservation.
Yep, yep.
Even if you check out of the guest. you put it in your email.
I didn't even, people were asking about having a guest.
It's new, it wasn't in 2020.
Yeah, a lot of people said that, oh, if I could just be a guest really quick because of their self-service reception. Yeah, that actually helps a lot, although it doesn't capture the emails and it doesn't, or I mean, maybe,
Your email,
oh,
you can say check out the guest. Email confirmation.
Yeah. And I think that the other thing is license plate readers. So understanding how do we get a frictionless system? How do we not have people at the booths as often? That's something that I think the park is looking to work towards at some point. But I think that would be kind of the ultimate system, is having kind of one person oversee and then having the QR codes scanned through and letting people in through the bar. That would help certainly.
That one too, I think when we talked about that, the basic how, like to have that turnaround for frictionless, like we are very, Gail knows better than me. A lot of that infrastructure stuff around reservation systems is very restricted by the character of the store. So when we look at that type of stuff and like the infrastructure, you need the wireless, and like, have you, like, what was the option? To blast through, you don't have a reservation, you blast through, your license plate gets flagged, then what happens? Is there a gate that stops you and then your person kind of turn you around?
Or like
Or does it
spikes.
go up to the?
Yeah.
And it's actually more enforcement to write your ticket, like I wish we could do it, it's just so much logistics and different type of.
Some people would be willing to pay the ticket,
Yeah.
like the ticket would be worth the cost.
Well, that's
I agree
a-
that-
Well, that's,
Having done traffic control at the North Lot on a busy weekend, like the number of people who came to say, okay, how do I get up Cadillac? I couldn't get a reservation, how do I get up there? Like to the point of like, can you take me up there? How much would it cost?
Yeah.
Do you have, I see your car, or you can take me in that. I was like, yeah, if I didn't like my job.
well, I was talking to the people at the base in 2021, and they were saying that people would like flash $100 bills in front of them, like, oh, like, can I get up? Like bribery, it's a thing.
You could hitchhike up.
Oh, you do, can. Oh, I forgot to add the picture.
You can scalp your back seat.
Can't get out.
Pay your $6 and charge people $20 for the fee. And the back.
My original business plan. That's,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, there are ride sharing services. I had no one in the ride sharing service, like no one take my survey. It's it's definitely, right, definitely. Yeah, you have a question?
Yes, you conducted the survey, do you remember feedback you were getting during fee paid?
There were, fee-free days were not, yeah, so I was gonna say, that wasn't part of the scope, so I was only June through August, unless there were some in June, maybe. I don't, and that, oh, sorry, what were you gonna say, I'm sorry. And also, I think you still have to pay a reservation, it's just, that's for park pass, so even if,
The income restrictions for fee-free day, you don't have to purchase it.
right,
And it's just.
just the $6 for that day specifically, yeah. And I mean, in theory, you could time your Founder's Day and Cadillac Mountain visit, and then you would really only pay $6 to come enjoy the park for that day. But as we see, the people who are coming here, $6 is like penny. I think someone explained to me that, oh, every 7 minutes, it's like a quarter. And I'm like, oh yeah, like this is so minuscule to certain people that they're thinking about it in terms of like, oh, a quarter for every 7 minutes, or like per unit time. I'm like, man, they are really like saying how like minute it is to pay. Although, like I was saying, willingness to pay varies between demographics in some ways of that, but like I said, I don't want to go too much into it, but, yeah, go for it.
So it's my understanding that EMT does have a controlled access plan for the new schools that they have yet to implement. What would you tell
God, the fact that I don't know anything about that plan, I'm leaving, is,
them? They're just too scared to implement it. is my understanding.
I think there's, like I said, there's multiple studies coming out saying that once you put the system in, people are gonna gripe for a while, but once they're in the system, it's so much better. You're just guaranteed that access, especially if it's in so high demand that people cannot visit. And I think people now are understanding that reservations are just part of national parks. I would say they should do a pilot, try it out, get the feedback, and then they should try to implement if they find that that is appropriate. Although I'd say talk to Adam because he's got a PhD and 2 postdocs. So yeah, but I mean, for what it's worth, I'd say the visitor experience is going to be better for them. And people generally who go out west go to multiple parks. I mean, Acadia just happens to be like one of the farthest. And so people who are coming here really have the intention of coming to Acadia and Maine generally. So I'm very aware of the time and that there's another meeting here at 1 that is supposed to come in. But I have my email somewhere on here, my Friends of Acadia email and my, yeah, so.
Thank you.
Yay.
That was awesome.
Yay, oh, you dropped.
Sorry, with all that